The good, the bad, and the ugly realities of the cannabis industry in the era of Darwinism. This panel is sponsored by Dickinson Wright and UHY. And we're going to take a quick photo here. Let me introduce Albert Allen, principal of UHY, Charles Bullock, principal, Bullock Stevenson, Jerome Crawford, chief legal officer, Pleasantrees, Mark Khoury, senior corporate counsel, TerrAscend, Benjamin Sobczak, partner, Dickinson Wright, and this is moderated by Myles Baker, the man with the incredible sneaker collection, partner at Dickinson Wright. Myles, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you very much. Have fun. Enjoy.
Good. Well, thank you guys. I know we're excited for another good panel here. Thank you to Power Connections. Thank you to our esteemed panel of guests, our speakers, and thank you to all of our guests. As Derek said, our topic here today is the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll let you decide which of the panelists best fit those descriptions. But my name is Myles Baker, and I'm a cannabis regulatory attorney at Dickinson Wright. Like I said, we're here to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, because right now the Michigan cannabis industry finds itself in a state of flux. Much like the evolutionary landscape that Charles Darwin described, there are species that are adapting and surviving in the current market, species that are struggling to survive, and the extinct or soon to be extinct casualties of the market's unforgiving forces. Today, our panelists give a unique perspective, all being different service providers or operators in that industry, and they're going to talk about the ways to best survive or attempt to predict what comes next, and when those prosperous days will continue or return. So, I'm going to start by exploring the good. We've all heard some horror stories. I suspect we'll hear a few more today. But there are also companies that are out here thriving in this hyper-competitive, price-compressed market. So let's hear what the secret ingredients are for success in Michigan's cannabis industry present day. What's the magic sauce that's allowing companies to thrive under the current market circumstances? I'm going to call people out, but I'm also going to throw it to the group in general. Alan or Mark, you guys want to weigh in on this one?
So companies that are thriving in the industry today are ones that really understand their costs and how those affect every aspect of the business. It's not just to reduce costs, it's am I utilizing costs to get the best yield I can get or the best efficiencies I can get? Am I leveraging my technology to the best of its abilities to get everything out of it of what I'm trying to pay for? In an era where prices have come down and everybody's really trying to worry about volume and cutting costs, the question is, are the costs we incurring really producing a return that's worth the cost?
I echo that as well. I've seen, with ours, just a lot of cost cutting, and then it's cutting the right costs, exactly. Leveraging technology, being more efficient. With our stores, I think we've also seen the emphasis on customer and just making sure we have the right products, the right blend of products, and each store is a little bit different with the customer base, so just making sure everything is we map that out and make sure that everything is customer centric.
I'll toss that to any of the other panelists if you want to weigh in on that. If not, I'll continue.
In my experience, I would say that the companies that are doing well right now are the ones that picked one or two lanes and got really good at it and are consistent on the few things that they're doing or the lean business model they have. I think a lot of the companies that came in to do everything found that they didn't do anything exceptionally well because they were too spread out, and that makes it harder to compete when it gets overly competitive.
Man, that's really fitting this concept of evolution, right? You're talking about thriving in a way that'll help you survive. Is that right?
That's why we came up with the name, Myles.
Yeah, we're so good at this. All right, and then let's shift gears. Okay, what's the flip side of the coin, right? If we've heard the good, let's talk about some of the bad. What are the common pitfalls or mistakes that are now causing certain companies to struggle or fail in the current market? Stated otherwise, what are the biggest mistakes you're seeing, and what can companies learn from? I'm going to throw this one to Ben, Chuck, and then whoever else wants to answer.
Go ahead, Chuck.
So I come at this from the perspective of a receiver. So I get appointed by the court to often go in and try to unscramble what issues are. And I have a few basic rules that I think are rarely followed, which generally lead to me being appointed. The first is best practices. I think it's a business. It needs to be run like a business. And I think a lot of the folks that maybe transitioned from the unlicensed side to the medical side to now the rec side, they maybe don't have the background. So it's important to have a team in place that can kind of work through that. The second is, if you have partners, don't fight with your partners. There is nothing that ruins a business quicker than a partnership dispute. And it's one of the bases for bringing a receiver in. The next is, don't oversubscribe. I see so many of these businesses where you have sort of a promoter who goes out and says, all right, I need to raise $3 million. And then they realize, well, boy, they had an additional $2 million that they could raise, and they become oversubscribed. The next point that I think is absolutely critical is keep your investors apprised of the status of the business operation. Nobody is quicker to turn on a manager than someone that's invested a fair amount of money in the business, and they're not getting any information, even basic information. The last point, which I think is also critical, if you borrow money, put a budget together and try to pay it back. So often I see, out-of-state lenders that come into Michigan, and frankly, they don't really want to take the business. They don't want to take the assets. They just want to be paid. Now, sure, the interest rates right now, until sort of the regulations change, are really, really high. But if you borrow the money, my God, sit down and pay it back, because inevitably, you may not have to respond to your lender for a fair period of time, but the minute they file a lawsuit, you're in front of a judge, and the easiest thing for them to do is bring a third-party fiduciary in to kind of sort things out.
Echoing some of the comments already made, in my mind, looking back historically and now, the number one thing that's contributing to failures is just too much leverage. There is too many people who took on too much debt or too many facilities or too big a plan at a time when we were all just so happy to be here, right? And so fired up about the industry and all the positivity. And I don't think enough people sat down and said, all right, well, what does this look like if half of our positive assumptions don't turn out the way that we planned? Like, our projections are at X per pound. How low can it go before we have problems? And I think, that's partially just based on the fact that the cannabis industry was kind of raised on like dreams and excitement of people to be able to do this commercially and out and open in public. And this is one of the downsides of that. Present day, it's operations, right? Like was said before, if you still don't know what your costs are and you can't throw an AFS report together to save your life because your books and records are kept in the shoebox somewhere, if you're spending all your time figuring out problems that you made for yourself by not doing it right in the beginning, then you don't have time to actually run the business and compete. And at this point, that'll be the end of you, because there's a lot of other people looking for those same customers and shelf space, and you got to be great all the time.
Any other takers?
If I can say, I agree with you. We have a lot of clients that don't understand the sensitivity of what happens to their business model when things change, whether that's prices going down or costs coming up. The other thing we see is poor contracts between not related parties, but interested parties. Not everybody's vertically integrated, and some people want either exclusivity or guarantees, and we see a lot of poorly written contracts with one side trying to get everything, but because of growth schedules, it might not kick off till 6 months. The whole world's changed. So now you have a potential either a breach of contract or a lousy contract that you don't want to keep. Everybody's working in this industry together. We're all trying to achieve the same goal. If you're going to get into business with somebody else, be as understanding with them as you'd want them to be with you. Write good contracts with certain flexibilities that are going to get you what you want at a cost that's fair, not necessarily always something that's advantageous. Because if you end up with a litigation, it's just going to cost you more money just to get out of the bad contract.
Well, we talked about the good, we talked about the bad. and now it's time to face the ugly truth. If we were to give a business rating, what would it be? I know Halloween's just passed, but would it be a horror movie? Would it be a comedy of errors? Or would it be something in between? Let's hear some brutally honest takes on the current business environment and the state of the industry. We're going to throw this one to Jerome and Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening if you look outside. I'm sure it's dark already because of that daylight savings time thing. But
Crazy.
We appreciate y'all being here with us. Current business environment, Myles, is a great question. We're strong C. Strong C is a rating. Now, what I mean is that C's get degrees. It still can get it done. And the irony of me making that comment when I say strong C is because the business environment, it's ugly for a lot of reasons. I came from what you might call traditional industry in that I was in big law. I was in in-house counsel, publicly traded company you're in 25, 30 countries and high business level ops. What people always ask the question, we talked about a panel just a moment ago about what makes cannabis so difficult, is that we are so brand new, it's so nascent, and simultaneously, the goalpost moves a lot for a lot of people and a lot of players in the industry. So whether it be the changing rules, the changing environment, from a regulatory landscape, from business relationships that at once were thought this is going to be great, from the hockey stick projections that are going to be awesome, and then you're talking a span of sometimes months, not years, that change. How many of us exit business relationships and find a new contractor, a new consultant to help you do something? Because the reality is we're all about the same age. Someone made a great comment earlier about being juvenile. We're about, toddler industry. Anyone ever been around a toddler before? Tough, right? Anyone ever try to tell a toddler what to do? And the challenge, I use this analogy sometimes even with our regulatory environment of us working together with municipalities, working with our regulator. They're the referees trying to ref the game, right? We got to help them change the law so they can ref the game. And the reality is they're also as old as us. So what makes this environment super ugly is because take the toddler analogy and put us all in a sandbox together. Anyone ever seen Recess before?
Great show.
A great show. But the concept of recess is also pretty ugly, right? Because a lot of folks are figuring it out that either maybe did come from traditional industries, that did not come from traditional industries. So I think it makes it for a tough space. And there was a comment that, Chuck, you illuminated I want to really follow up on about what's the bad you see a lot, right? I think it's failure to communicate. And you talked about that from updating stakeholders. It doesn't mean you're going to have anything good to say, right? Sometimes you don't have anything good to say. Like the contract that Albert mentioned earlier, it's not a great one. And maybe you find out 6 months in the deal, this is really skewed, or it's not working out. How do we actually renegotiate that contract and find a win-win? Because that's better in the long run. So I think you'll hear a lot of my responses are probably more thematic because the challenges are the challenges, right? The facts are the facts of why this industry in particular is a tough one to make it in. But I think these anecdotal comments, namely the themes of trying to work together, trying to win together, will get us there. But that's why it's ugly because, frankly, we're not doing it right now because of naturally trying to survive.
What you got for me, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenging market right now. Just kind of riding the wave. When I started, it was kind of a rapid growth, and we look, and it's like, do we grow a little too quick, pull back in, and then it's just kind of level it off, and that's where important. The legal side is important with the contracts. A lot of this is handshake deals. It's make sure something needs to be memorialized. It's memorialized. It's making sure you're commercial and not a roadblock for the business, but you still protect the business. Recently I've kind of transitioned to more of our Northeast states, so it's interesting being on kind of the other side of it and seeing these, growth markets where, it's similar. So, now I know kind of what to look for and make sure we don't have any of the issues we've run into on the legal side.
I wanted to make this point this whole panel, or I wanted to make sure I did. The ugly right now is all the lawsuits. The ugly right now is the receiverships and the posts on social media about a whole facility got shut down and everybody got notice on Friday when they showed up at work. The ugly is everybody's accounts payable or accounts receivable lists that are massive numbers, 120 days out. But I also wanted to make the point that likening to the subject here of Darwinism, I look at this state as a hyper sped up petri dish of evolution, right? And that's a violent process. Like in nature, it's a violent process, and here it's a violent process. And the truth is, Michigan is a very healthy weed market. There's just too many people here trying to sell too much stuff, and it's too cheap. And the only way I can see to fix that is, frankly, like a bunch of companies got to die. And the process that we're going through right now of the weak ones or the ones who took on too much debt or the ones who aren't good operators getting called out and clearing out the market is going to, someday leave a really nice flat plane for the people who survive through that. But in the meantime, yeah, it's ugly and it's sad and it's violent to watch some of this happen to some of these people. But I do think it's somewhat of the natural process. At least to the extent, I'm not an economist, but I've heard this happens before. So,
Well, now that we got real National Geographic in here, let's take a break from the industry talk. And we've got a panel of people that do quite a bit of different things in the industry. So I kind of want to talk about what a typical workday is for you guys in 2024 and how it's changed from the past. Are you buried in litigation? Are you chasing down permits? Or are you simply trying to keep up with the regulatory landscape? Let's hear about a day-to-day grind about what comes across your desk. I've got this for Ben and Chuck, but everybody's got a mic.
Much of what I deal with on a daily basis is a lot of damage control, trying to manage situations that have sort of gotten away from the company. Many of those things are preventable. There are a couple of things that I'm convinced of. Every grower thinks they are the single greatest grower in the state of Michigan, and that there is often generally one person that created the business, brought investors in, and is unwilling to sort of work cooperatively, amongst the group of investors and the stakeholders to make decisions. Now, you can't have, decision-making by committee, but I see a lot of strong personalities, a lot of small business people who, to their detriment, they're excluding the other stakeholders from sort of advising and consenting to business decisions. So as a result of that, I'm dealing with, grow operations that need to be attended to, financials that have never been updated. Often I have the state, and the state's a whole different animal right now. The state in its enforcement efforts have stepped up quite a bit over the last, few months. If you think about where we were maybe in 2018, it's a completely different landscape. And then the other thing which I think is so easy to deal with, but just so often not followed, I have to sit down and I have to put together financials. And I think to myself, you're running a business, it's a good business, it could be a good business, and you're not following sort of that financial path. And, if it were me, I would kind of dispense with having receivers and multiple layers of lawyers. I'd have a really, really good lawyer, I'd have a really, really good accountant, and I'd have that accountant in my shop, a couple of days, a month, kind of helping with best practices. But those are the things that I'm dealing with right now. And it's expensive.
Benny?
The punchline is that we're doing a lot more lawsuits now than we were in the last few years ago. Everybody was building things and doing deals and financing, and now there's a lot of people suing each other. So, like Chuck said, don't fight with your partners, but if you do, go ahead and give me a call. The litigation-wise, I want to just anecdotally, my colleague Caitlin in the back went to a hearing in circuit court last week on a case that involved cannabis, and the judge's opening comments were, "Oh, another cannabis case. I hate these." That's how it started, right? Like, the circuit courts in Michigan are inundated with collection lawsuits, close corporate dispute lawsuits, all types of cases. The judges don't even know how to deal with them. There's so many of them. And, that's part of the process that I described before. But a ton of that, generally, also doing a lot of collection work for lenders or helping facilitate transitions of assets, including sometimes with Chuck, who's a fantastic receiver in that regard. And then lastly, I think it's just regulatory compliance. Myles and I do a lot of compliance conferences. You all know that there's more of those than there used to be. And, let's not forget, one of these days the new rules are going to come out, I'm told.
Can't wait.
And so then, people like us got to drill through all that and figure everything out. and help everybody re-pivot, to whatever that means. But yeah, mostly just a lot of litigation right now.
All right. So, despite the current challenges, remember that Michigan's cannabis industry is still one of the strongest and highest selling in the country, thanks to a lot of people in this room. In that regard, it was recently announced that Michigan surpassed California for total units sold and average per capita spend per adult. So the burning question is, how long will this current low point last? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Or are we in for a long, dark night? And what factors do we ultimately think turn things around? I'm going to throw this to Alan and Jerome and whoever else.
Wow, what factors? The number one factor, and it's why it's made a great, great TV show for a long time, and it also fits you guys' theme tonight, survive. And survival is not always couched in great models and great certain decision-making and certain plans. You have to be incredibly adaptable to whatever the environment presents you at that time. So one thing, one particular focus I always encourage my team on is be careful the relationships you forge and how you treat people in those relationships. Great comment was said earlier about, I think if you pinch one person in the industry, everybody feels it because everybody knows each other and everybody talks and gossips, in good and bad ways, right? So your reputation will precede you. And I often say that your quote-unquote competitors may become your partners very quickly. Ben made a comment earlier, and it sounds painful, right? This is called the good, the bad, and the ugly, but the reality is not every group as structured today is going to make it, quote-unquote, on the other side. And I say as structured today because it's not everything is necessarily a painful bloodbath, or my guy Chuck's here involved. But the reality is maybe there's, partnerships you never considered before, right? So I think it's checking a lot of ego at the door, checking a lot of pride at the door, understand you're doing the best thing for those employees. Another ugly reality that Ben said that happens in our space that I hate, and I came from automotive, right, in those worlds, and you hear a lot of stories there, but people showing up and their jobs are gone, right? Without even notice, right? And sometimes it's not, we say management issues, sometimes it's like literally the reality is things change that quickly, or at least they can, I think, when people operate in a sense of doubt, right? So we have to have some self-awareness along the way as well. It can be another factor and attribute to survive. Who are we really? What are we really good at, right? It was said earlier about don't do too many things. You probably don't have the luxury because you don't have the margin of error, but what are we really good at? And what are they good at? How do we complement each other? How do we win together so that we, in this natural selection experience, can better our chances of being on the other side?
To Ben's point, there's some people in the industry that are doing a very good job, and there's some people that are really struggling. And there's a lot of factors as to why that is. So as a whole, it's hard to say whether or not the whole industry is going to look better or the whole industry is going to look worse. It's really going to be up to your individual operators. There are some factors that are going to affect everybody coming forward. One is the reclassification from a Class 1 to a Class 3. We like to see it happen. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we'd like it to be soon. Would be legalization, or at least decriminalization on a federal level. Allow us to move across state lines so we can start unloading some of our excess inventory or excess grow or whatever it is, which would help the price suppression we've seen because of how many people are producing how much. It's a vicious cycle we're in where everybody has to undercut everybody to make sure that they're the ones that gets the sale, but then they also want to grow more because now they have to cover more overhead with more product but less margin. This was a great growing season for Michigan, which normally would sound like a very big positive, but it's a huge negative. Pound for pound, we're almost 33% up from where we were in 2023. There's more supply, and the people that don't know how to manage all of those things are going to fall by the wayside. The problem is that as people kind of fall off or get brought up, there's then less competition, less supply, and then it gets better for the people that are still in the market. So a lot of people who aren't navigating well today, we may see go away tomorrow. The people that are doing a good job today will be the ones that are still in this industry 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Well,
I think it's important to mention intoxicating hemp derivatives. I'm of the opinion that there's a present war for the national marketplace of the future between intoxicating hemp derivatives and state licensed marijuana operators. And who's going to win that is going to be decided in the Capitol with the forthcoming Farm Bill amendment. But I mean, the truth is, folks, like if the feds don't stop that, and you can just go ahead and like sell not weed that gets people high through the mail and like just be completely normal with it. I think it's very hard for state legal cannabis companies to catch that when those people have already built out like national consumer, business to consumer models over the internet, which, as we all know from Amazon, is kind of how people like to shop nowadays. The other thing I think is important is not just descheduling, but how are the feds going to enforce under Schedule 3? Like, none of your weed businesses are ever going to be able to actually comply with Schedule 3, right? You are not Pfizer. Like, it's not going to happen at the retail weed outlet. So how is that going to be addressed? And then lastly is regulatory here in Michigan, right? Like, what's going to happen with conversion? What's going to happen with remediation? What's going to happen with all these other big ticket regulatory issues that we're all waiting to see what's going to come of it, and the rules have not dropped yet? How those things fall will dictate the environment, and the environment will dictate, who survives and who doesn't. I think it will get better eventually, but I think it will be challenging and kind of ugly until it gets there.
Well, that dovetails into my last question, and I'm going to ask you guys to look into the crystal ball, right? If we're going to fast forward 2, 5, maybe even 10 years, what does the Michigan cannabis industry look like in that period of time? Will it be a thriving oasis? Will it be a desolate wasteland? Will it be something in between? Who will be the winners and losers? And I'll ask you all, like Jerry Springer, for your final thought.
The winners and the losers are going to be the people that are operating well and the people that aren't. I mean, we know what that's going to be. This industry, unless something drastic happens, is going to be around for a long time. Recreational use, has only been around here less than 10 years, just over 5 years. And it's exploded. It's a huge industry. It creates a bunch of benefit to the communities through taxes. So there's no reason for us to get rid of it or legislate it away. We just have to survive ourselves underneath really the current constraints and other challenges. Having a good team that understands your business and understands those outside factors and how they interchange with each other is really going to be a big success point to get through these things until they kind of come behind us.
All right, who wants last word?
I completely agree with that. It's just core business fundamentals, making sure we stick to, reviewing costs, not going overboard, giving a good product to the customer, and then, eventually water will find its level.
Great. Well, that's our panel for today. I really thank you guys for taking the time to listen to us, and I'm going to pass the mic back to Derek.